My friends, welcome to this episode of the TOGR Review. I hope you all are doing well. What I have here in my hands today is a tent from a company known as Free Soldier. This is a military style of tent, a civilian tent that has a tactical sort of look to it. The thing is about this tent that really caught my attention is that it looks like the LiteFighter one-person military tent. That is a legit military tent system that has current use with US military forces. With the Free Soldier tent, I've already begun testing it out, and in this episode, not only is this a preview, but it's my initial review. I've been able to do some testing, but I'm not done with it. That is why this is a hybrid preview review episode. First things first, let's go ahead and let's do a component breakdown with this tent so you can see what you receive if you decide to purchase it. Next, I will set it up. Now, for this episode, I'm going to be setting up this tent in the middle of this road, and that's because it is a very hot day. I do not want to be out in the sun. This is basically the only shady spot around here, so that's the plan, everybody. Let's get to it. This is the Free Soldier tent in its storage bag. Up here at the top, we have a draw pull. In this bag here, we have tent stakes, and there are 6 tent stakes in total. Here we have the tent poles, here is the fly, and here we have the body. What you're looking at here is the Free Soldier tent, one-person tent. We have one pole that spiders across the top and spreads out the top. We have stakeout points in each of the corners along with buckles. These buckles are used to connect to the fly. This is a one-person tent that features one door. Unfortunately, this tent, as you have already noticed, has a ton of fabric on it. This tent doesn't just have a bathtub floor like you would expect with a 3-season summertime tent. This tent has very high walls, and unfortunately these walls block wind, they block airflow, and they hold in heat. Also, as you can see here, this fabric wraps all the way around this tent. We do have some mesh, right? But unfortunately this mesh is up high, so when you're inside of this tent, you're laying down low, you're down here, and the cool breeze that you want to feel in the summertime, it cannot hit you because of that fabric. If you're sitting up, you can feel it, but unfortunately if you're laying down, you can't. We do have 2 small sections of mesh at the foot box and at the head, but unfortunately they're very small. Additionally, at the top of the tent, we have a large panel of fabric, unfortunately. Going around to the front here, we have the door. We have 2-way zippers, and the door can be rolled back. Taking a look on the inside of the tent, you can see that the walls are super high. You can see the 2 mesh vents at the head and the foot box. The tent features 4 mesh pockets, and we have 2 hooks to hang gear from. With the door here, everybody, it's not super small, but at the same time, it doesn't feel like it's as big as it should be. It feels like you should be able to unzip this even further and roll this more out of the way, but you can't do that. And because of that, getting in and out of this tent is going to be more difficult for larger individuals. I'm now on the inside of the tent. Let's go ahead and measure this up. As far as width goes, you are looking at 27.5 inches wide. As far as peak height goes, 35 inches. As far as length goes, to be comfortable, 71 inches, which is 5 feet 11 inches. Any taller than that, your head and your feet would be touching the ends of the tent. Before I exit the tent here, I want to bring to your attention one more time these fabric walls. I could feel air coming through the mesh up high, but not down low. So down low, super hot. Up high, nice and cool. This is a big problem for this tent. And unfortunately, this is what a lot of companies do. They will market a tent as a 3-season tent, a summertime tent in other words. But the thing is this, it's really more of a hybrid tent. As soon as you add fabric, it makes it a hybrid tent. A tent that is good for cool conditions only. 3+ season tents, also known as hybrid tents, are good for a very limited amount of time, namely in the cool months. So we're talking about fall, we're talking about spring, and some in the winter depending on where you live. And of course on the conditions. We're talking about cool conditions, not cold conditions, and certainly not hot conditions. Today it is 81 degrees inside of this tent. Even with the door open, even with the mesh here, I'm on fire. I'm sweating my brains out, and that's because there's limited airflow inside of this tent. Because of all of the fabric on this tent, this is not a 3-season tent, or in other words, a warm weather summertime tent. I would recommend this shelter for spring and fall going into the winter, namely the cooler months. Do not use this in the summertime or you will be sorry. Or I should say, you will be hot. Now that the fly is on, the very first thing that I want you to pay attention to is how the fly goes basically down to the ground. This is what you see generally with 4th season tents, also known as wintertime tents. Tents designed for cold weather will have the fly that goes all the way down to the ground so that wind and air cannot get underneath the fly to the inside of the tent. You do not want this feature in a 3-season summertime tent, because it keeps the inside of the tent too warm. It limits airflow, it promotes condensation. All of this translates to being very hot and uncomfortable inside of this tent, especially when you have to seal this up because it's raining outside. The next thing that I want you to pay attention to here is the door itself. We have a storm flap that goes over the zipper. It is of a very good size. The zipper goes from here to here, and you can roll up the door right here. That makes entering and exiting this tent very small because this is a small opening. Why can you not roll this back all the way? To me, this just makes no sense at all. Going over to the sides of the tent, each side is the exact same way. Again, we have a feature that you would find typically with a wintertime tent, not a 3-season summertime tent. You can see here that the fly basically lays up against the body and it's limiting airflow. With a good quality 3-season summertime tent, you should be able to pull this out so that air can get underneath the fly to the inside of the tent. With this tent here, you cannot do that. When coming around to the back side of the tent here, it stakes out here in the back and it does pull away from the body. At the back here, it is raised up slightly, which is good because you can feel some air coming through here into the inside of the tent. It's not much, but it's better than nothing. Going up, we have a vent. Now, unfortunately, this vent is terrible. On the inside, we have a piece of foam that is supposed to hold this open. With my use, I have found that not to be the case. All that it does is spread the material apart just a little. So little that it makes no difference at all. In a nutshell, my friends, that is the Free Soldier 1-person military tent. Now, before I start with my review, the pros and the cons, let's go over some stats real quick. The company claims this is a 3-season tent, but as you can see here, that's not true. This really is a 3+ season hybrid tent. This is made for cool conditions, not for warm conditions. This is a semi-freestanding tent. This is a 1-person tent. It has 1 door. The color that you see here is what they refer to as mud, but in truth, it is coyote brown. Why the company calls this color mud, I have no idea. At the same time, they show a little picture and it's green for some reason. I don't know. There is an OCP camo version of this tent available as well, and it is very similar to the LiteFighter 1-person military tent as far as the camo pattern goes. When it comes to the materials that are used with this shelter here, there's a little bit that I know and a whole lot that I don't. The company states on their website that this is made from an Oxford. That's all they say. Now, I know that means Oxford polyester, and that does explain the overall size of this tent as far as the stored form factor goes, and also the weight. They do not state the denier of the material, they do not state the waterproof rating of the material, they do not state what type of zippers were used. I have no idea either. I can tell you that we have aluminum poles and aluminum stakes, and some sort of Oxford polyester material. That's all that I know. When it comes to the stored dimensions of this tent, we are looking at 19 inches by 7.5 inches by 5 inches. A little while ago, I went over the setup dimensions. As far as the weight goes, 4.8 pounds. The cost of this tent on the Free Soldier website is $110. Currently, this tent is not available on Amazon. That takes us over to my initial review of this tent. So far, I have 2 nights in this shelter. Out of those 2 adventures, I filmed one and I shared that with you all. The other was a personal trip with a friend of mine. So out of those 2 nights out with this tent, I am basing this initial review. Now there are some things that I do not know, and I'll touch upon those in just a minute. The first pro that I have for this tent is actually quality. The quality of this tent is quite good. The seam work, the threads, the stitching, the seam tape, everything about this tent actually looks really, really good. And I have to admit, I'm quite surprised by this. For $110, I didn't know what to expect, especially with a product from a company that I've never heard of before. But yeah, the overall quality of this, the build construction, looks to be rather good. As far as the materials go, they are what you would expect for the money. The tent is made from a very inexpensive Oxford polyester, which is typical for a tent in this price range. With that being said though, I am quite impressed with how thick the materials are. They feel substantial. Now there is a trade-off there. Weight, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. As far as space goes inside of this tent, it's not bad, but it could be better. This tent is designed for individuals 5'11" and under. If you're 5'11" and under, you can fit inside of this tent. You have a little bit of space left over on the inside for gear and so on. Also, you do have the vestibule space, which is adequate enough. Additionally, you can sit up inside of this tent, change clothes, and all of that stuff. If you're 5'11" and under, you're not going to have too hard of a time getting in and out of this tent, but I do wish that the doors were larger. As far as setting up the tent and breaking it down, this is all very easy. It's very straightforward and it makes sense. And the last pro that I have for this tent is price. At $110, what you're getting here is better in some cases than what you can find with other tent shelters. But that doesn't mean that you should go buy this tent, because at the same price, you can find better. That is the simple truth to the matter. And that takes us over to the cons that I have for this tent. Con number 1 is this. Folks, there's no guy lines on this tent. So this is not a tent that you should use in really strong winds. This is such an oddity of a tent. You know, it's like there's a good idea here, but as it stands right now, it doesn't feel like it's a fully fleshed out tent shelter. It feels like it's missing features that the tent should have. Next, my friends, we have to talk about the weight of this tent. This is a 1-person tent and it weighs almost 5 pounds. It is quite heavy and the stored form factor is quite large. This means you're going to feel it on your back and it's going to take up quite a bit of space inside of your backpack. Con number 3 deals with all of the fabric on this tent and the limited airflow that you're going to get inside of it. Because of the limited airflow, the tent is going to hold in heat. It's going to block air, and condensation is going to form. On both nights out with this tent, I had condensation on the inside on the fly. It didn't pose a problem, but the inside of the fly was wet. Con number 4 is the fly and the way that it goes all the way down to the ground. Con number 5 deals with the fly as well, and the fact that the stakeout points are non-adjustable, which means that you really need to set this up on a perfectly flat, level, even surface to get the best pitch. Because if you don't, and because the stakeout points are non-adjustable, the overall pitch of this tent tends to be pretty poor. With one of the overnight trips that I did with this tent, the ground was uneven, and because of that, the overall pitch of this tent was awful. I had to pull more so on the backside to set this up because there was no other options, and because I did that, it put a lot of stress on the vent, forcing the vent shut. This would not have been a problem if the stakeout points were adjustable. So this is just a big fail. It's an oversight, it's a mishap, and it's a shame for this tent. And it does cause problems with this shelter and the way you have to set it up. Con number 6 deals with the vent and the fact that it will force itself closed if you have to stretch the material to stretch out the fly. That piece of foam is just about worthless, and so is that vent. Next, everyone, when it comes to the storage bag for this tent, unfortunately it is very, very small, and getting this tent packed back into that is a real chore. When you go out for a trip and it's time to break down your tent, you better roll that thing as tight as you possibly can, because even when you do that, you're going to struggle getting that tent back inside of this bag here. The unfortunate truth is that the storage bag is too small. It is frustratingly small, or at least I should say, it frustrated me. That should give you enough information for you at least to decide whether or not you're interested in this tent, whether or not this may be a good option for you. The biggest question that I have now is whether or not this is waterproof. In one of the trips that I did out with this trip, it did rain, but it was super, super light. It didn't count. As soon as we get out of this dry pattern, I plan to test out this tent to see whether or not it's waterproof, so stay tuned. I will have a test night episode with this tent coming up soon. So that is right now my biggest question concerning this tent. Is it going to be waterproof? The company has an all right shelter here. It has good bones, so to speak, but they need to go back to the drawing board, and fix this thing. I mentioned at the beginning that this tent is very similar to the LiteFighter one-person tent. While they're similar in terms of design, they are not the same tent. And there's no reason why you should buy this over the LiteFighter tent. With all of that being said, everybody, this has been an interesting tent to check out. I love tents, I love shelters, I love outdoor equipment, and I love testing out gear. So yeah, definitely interesting. Don't buy this for summertime use. This is a cool weather tent only. You can't guy it out, which means that you can't use it in adverse conditions. We'll find out soon enough whether or not it's waterproof. Bizarre. That's how I would describe this tent. It's bizarre. It's almost like it was designed by a company or an individual who has never designed a tent before. Someone who hasn't even gone out camping all that much. Because there's so many features here that are like wrong or missing. It just doesn't make sense. Everyone, comment down below, share your thoughts. What do you all think about this tent? The Free Soldier tent. You may be wondering, how did I find out about this company, this product? I heard from you all. Or it could have actually been from the company. Who knows? One day I received a bunch of questions and comments about this tent, and the next day I heard from the company asking if I wanted to review it. Is that manipulation? Maybe. Maybe it was the company, I don't know. Nonetheless, I doubt they're going to like the video that I'm putting up today, because everyone, in the end, I do not recommend purchasing this. Not unless you have plans for like a very short window of time in the cooler months. But yet, I still don't know if it's waterproof, so as it stands right now, I would not recommend purchasing this tent. I have more testing to do, so stay tuned to the channel. This video is without a doubt long enough. Before you go, hit the thumbs up. I do appreciate it. Everybody, take care, be well, strength and honor. See ya.